All right, so I'm really fascinated by the fact that I can talk for an entire presentation on one word. And that one word is Kefi. Kefi's a Greek word, and it's one of those words that's hard to translate into English. And even though I have a short definition there, finding life's joy in any circumstance, I think that it doesn't really do it service. So I'm going to talk for maybe 15, 20 minutes about Kefi's background, how I learned it, how you can use it, and how one word can actually help you change the world. I think the best way to do that is to give you a series of stories. So the first story took place many years ago. Click, click, click. In New York City. I was visiting my daughter, who was in Manhattan one summer on a dance internship. And so while we were there, I asked her what plays we should see on Broadway. And the first one she insisted on that I see was a play called Rent. And I'd heard of Rent, but I didn't really know the story that well. And so before we began the play began that day, I was reading through the program, and I was fascinated by the story of Jonathan Larson, which, click. There we go. Jonathan Larson. Jonathan Larson is the guy that created Rent. And as fascinating, as interesting as the play was, the story behind the play, I think, is even better. And it's how I was first introduced to the word Kefi. So, Larson grew up in upstate New York. He went to high school, and actually he mostly spent his time in the theater. He was a self-proclaimed theater geek. And he was the kind of guy that would build the set, act in the play, write the music, sometimes play the music, did everything. Went on to Adelphi University and was doing the same thing there. Just most of his time spent in the theater. So it was no surprise to anyone when he decided that he would go to Broadway. He would make it big in the theater in New York City, which is a huge dream. It's one of those things that sounds good until you get there and start trying it. And he didn't have instant success. No one really does. But he did find other people like him who were also in New York City working on their dreams, artists, dancers, painters, singers, writers, actors, and they were all struggling like he was. And one of the things they were mostly struggling with was money. How would they pay their rent? So he started writing what he was going to call a modern musical. Larson grew up loving the traditional musicals, but thought there was nothing that was up to date. So his dream was to write a musical that would use modern rock music and somehow portray a story about the things that he thought were most important. What would that be? So, like many great writers, he wrote about what he knew. Struggling in New York City to become famous actor, singer, dancer, painter, writer. So he wrote this play, Rent. And the play was about people who are working towards their dream, but they're not there yet. And the thing that he most wanted to portray was the idea that even though we're always struggling, that in those times, this is the early days of AIDS, he knew people that had been diagnosed with this disease that people didn't even know what it really was to diagnose it, something strange. He knew that people were struggling with relationships. He knew people that were struggling with, obviously, with money. But the weird thing to him was that despite all that, they had these moments of joy and happiness. And he was really intrigued by the idea that no matter where you were, no matter what you were doing, you could have these flashes of happiness and joy. And it reminded him of a lesson that one of his college professors had taught him, Kefi, that no matter where you were, no matter what you were doing, you could still have moments of joy. So, that's what Rent was about. It was about struggling actors and singers and dancers and playwrights who were joyful despite the circumstances. And it's an incredibly emotional play, and those of you who are familiar with it know what I mean. Let me go back. So, before I move on, I just want to tell you the story about Larson is actually more poignant than the play itself. And most people don't really understand why this is so meaningful to me. So let me just get through that and tell you that Larson wrote this play over a 10-year period of time. And after 10 years, it was finally ready to go. And he had spent time getting investors and hiring actors and renting out the Neverlander Theater, and it's all coming to fruition. And the last night before opening night is your dress rehearsal. And this is a hugely important event in New York City and Broadway, because you're asking the New York Times and the Time Magazine, all the great play critics to come and talk or watch you perform your dress rehearsal, and then they're going to write about it. They're going to put the review in the paper, and everything depends on that review. So it's a very stressful night, even though there's no audience, they're just performing for the critics. And after they perform their final dress rehearsal, Larson is swarmed by the critics. They're Larson, you've done an amazing job. This is so unique. It's so creative. It's so new. It's going to be a huge hit. And we're going to write these amazing reviews. So Larson goes back to his apartment that night and sits down. Must have been feeling very content. Pours himself a cup of tea. And then he has a brain aneurysm and he dies. He was only 35 years old. Of course, the next day, he was supposed to open this play. They were preparing for it for months, and Larson had been working on it for years. And how are you going to do it without Larson himself? So, what would he have wanted? Obviously, to put it on. So it was a huge night. The actors performed to the best of their ability, and they go backstage and they're crying. Who's in the audience that night? Larson's family, his friends, that all come for. And it's like the irony, though, is what Larson's play was about. Was living in the moment, enjoying today. We don't know how much time we have. Enjoy those experiences every day that can give us those moments of pleasure or Kefi. And obviously, it had a huge impact on me because there I am talking about it today. So, I was thinking about how I could possibly incorporate Kefi into my own life, because I am not a playwright, I'm not an artist of any kind. So, my thing is athletics. And I remember from my own self that I had had some of my greatest experiences on a basketball court, for example. Flashes of moments of great pass or great shot. And that was my Kefi. And I remembered that when I was in Mexico several years later. I was with one of my other daughter, and we were building a playground at a Mexican orphanage. Mexican orphanages are a little different than the Annie kind of orphanage that you might think of, huge monstrosity. It's just a small house with half a dozen kids and some parents, not their parents, but some people that were taking care of them. And we had decided we were going to spend time with this organization called Caravana Mexicana working on this playground structure for them, these kids there. And it was a bunch of high school kids from this high school and several others in the area. And the kids sometimes, the orphan kids that were there, sometimes helped us with the construction, but most of the time they were just playing. And I couldn't help but notice how much happiness that they had while we were playing a simple soccer game. And the ball that they were using was flat. And the goals were like a rock in a tree. And they somehow made do. And they were still having these great moments of joy with Kefi. And I thought, okay, what can I do to make this experience better? And why not bring them a better soccer ball? It's such a simple solution. And athletics, I found, was one of the ways that we could portray Kefi or give kids the experience of Kefi. That's me in the top. This is in Nicaragua a few years ago. I think this is classic Kefi. Home plate's a rock. The experience of we're going to create our own basketball court. It doesn't really matter what our soccer ball looks like. We can have that joy. But it's not just the arts. I'm just not athletics. It's the arts as well. We can get a Kefi experience with dancing, painting, singing. All of these photographs are from refugee camps, and the top left is my favorite. That's at a refugee camp in Turkey, where kids don't seem that upset. You know where those kids are from? Those kids are from Syria. And if we know what's going on in Syria, we know how difficult life must be, but they still have these moments of joy, moments of happiness, moments of Kefi. So the question might be, why do we want to teach kids this concept? I'm a teacher, that's what I do. I want kids to understand what it is. So the first one is to have kids recognize it. I want people to know that when they see Kefi, they can say, yeah, there it is. There's people having joy. There's excitement. There's happiness. Why is that? Because so often kids don't actually do it. They know it, but they don't do it. They don't experience it for themselves. And I think the reason for that is because they're afraid to lose get out of their comfort zone. And I wanted to tell another story. I want to tell you another story about this simple concept of leaving your comfort zone. So a few years ago, remember rain? Stuff that comes out of the sky. Every once in a while, it's happened in California. We had a huge storm, and my classroom is right across the way here, and there were floods there, and it's like huge puddles. And so I asked all the kids to make paper boats. So fold your paper in a boat, let's go out and float it into the puddles. And some of the kids did it. We had a competition. Let's see who's going to float across the puddle quicker, and who's lasts the longest. So we had this competition, and there's all these boats sitting in this water. And I remember the principal came by. What is happening? We're creating. But what was really interesting to me is a lot of the kids never did it. They didn't get involved because I don't know. It's like, I have to get up, to work, I have to do something different, it might look silly, but so often you have those Kefi experiences, it's not about just having something magical happen. You have to actually do something. We can't experience Kefi unless we decide we want to paint, we want to draw, we want to act, we want to play a sport, we want to do something. You have to leave the comfort of wherever you are to fully understand that experience. Final point with regard to Kefi is that everybody should know is how accessible it is. I tried to portray this with photographs of people that on one end are amazingly wealthy and on the other end has nothing. So it's not restricted. I think that's what most attracted me to that concept. I think that's what Larson's major point was, that it doesn't matter where you are in the world, it doesn't matter what you have, what you don't have, we can all have joy. And if we can all have joy, then we can maybe avoid some of the things that I see way too often in the world, which is depression and mental illness. I teach high school students, and I see it all the time where I'm concerned. I worry that we're not joyful. We don't have happy moments. And what can we do about that? It's such a simple concept. Just one word. If you can look for it, you can leave your comfort zone, you can recognize it, you can experience it. Yeah, we're going to have our downtimes, we're going to have our negatives. But on the other hand, we can have happiness just by some simplistic act. So this last slide I want to show you, this is my dog. And I want to put this in here. I'm going to tell you how my thought changed after I originally put it in. So this is my dog, Kefi. And I was teaching her to dribble the basketball. And as you can see, she's pretty good with her right hand. But as all basketball players know, you got to be able to not only go in one direction. So now she's going with her left. She can go both ways. So my original thought was that one of the ways we can have Kefi moments is to have a pet. They give us such joy, such a simple thing. My second thought, though, was if Kefi, my dog, my puppy, if she can have a Kefi moment, which she obviously was having, then it's available to all of us. Thank you.